Gnomes are definitely in style, and I have always wanted to make myself a gnome pillow, so I'm doing that this year. Hi, I'm Christina, and I love to digitally apparel pattern, creating unique pieces of wearable art, and sometimes some houseware stuff. And today I am super excited to be making a gnome pattern. I always love how they look in the stores, and I was just like, I need to make one myself. If you're interested in following along with this pattern, you can find it from the link down below, and you can print it out yourself and make your very own gnome pattern. So let's get cutting and sewing. First thing I'm going to do is wash and dry my fabric the way I'm going to want to wash and dry my pillowcase, and I need to iron it out. I always like to pull my fabric right out of the dryer when it stops and iron it right away. That way I'm not fighting with set in wrinkles. Next, I'm going to cut out all the different pattern pieces. I am cutting out half of these pattern pieces on my Cricut, so I am only cutting out the front of the pillow, the back of the pillow, and the beard, because the beard's coming out of fur, and if you cut it on the Cricut, it will just cut away all that fur. So then the next thing I'm going to do is actually tape my pattern together. So I'm lining up all my numbers and lining up all the lines on each one of those pages and cutting apart the edges of the paper I don't need and getting it all ready to be cut out. Next, I am going to cut out all my fabric pieces. So I'm going to start by cutting out my center front of my gnome pillow. Then I'm going to unpin my pattern from this thing, and I'm actually going to back it with some white, because I'm not just putting this on a white pillow, I'm putting this on a pillow that we use in the other seasons, and I don't want the underneath pattern to show through. So I'm backing it with white so to make sure that it will not show through at all, because when I held it up, the polka dots, it did show through. Next, I'm going to cut out my side front pieces and my bottom front pieces. So we're just going to make sure that I have my fabric doubled up, and I'm going to pin my pattern to my fabric and cut it out. Then once I have those front pieces cut, I'm going to cut up the back pieces of the pillow. Next, I'm going to cut out my beard, so I'm going to pin my pattern to the beard, and then I'm going to use a box cutter or just a razor to cut it out. That way I'm only cutting through that very back layer, and I'm not chopping through any of the fur. The less fur that you can actually chop through, the less dirty the entire process will be, and it will just help keep your workspace a little bit cleaner. You'll still have some fur coming off. And I definitely needed to get a sharper razor, because I definitely needed to finish this particular project with some scissors. But also it was very delicate to cut all those things, and I'm hoping it's worth it. We'll have to see once I get sewing, or if I'll just also, next time I do this one, if I'll do a more simple beard, because the fur is going to go everywhere anyways, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to tell the difference. Next, it's time to start cutting all my pattern pieces out on the Cricut. I gave you both in PDF file and STL file, and I love how fast the Cricut just cuts out all those pieces for me, and they are precise. If the Cricut could cut out fur without cutting through the fur, I would definitely be down for that. But you know, maybe one day. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut out all my gnome pieces using my Cricut. Now it's time to actually get this pillow started. I'm going to start by serging around all of my pattern pieces. So that includes my center front, my two side fronts and side bottoms, and the side back. Now we're going to get this pillow started. First, we're going to start with sewing the two sides to the center front square to give the full length so that we can sew the top and bottom edges on. So I'm lining up the edges and sewing them down. I'm using a 1/2 inch seam allowance here instead of a 5/8. So just make sure you note that it is a 1/2 inch instead of 5/8. Then we are going to press open those 2 seams to make them look beautiful and crisp. Then we're going to line up our bottom and our top and bottom side pieces, and then we're going to sew them down. And then we're going to move over to the iron and iron them down. Now it's time to prep our back pieces. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to prep up 1/2 inch and prep up another inch. I'm going to iron them both nice and good down so that as I sew them, it's not wanting to walk on me at all. Once I have them ironed really well, I'm going to head back over to my sewing machine and top stitch right on the edge of that center inch. Now, here comes the fun part. I'm actually going to place all my pattern pieces on to double check kind of where the placement's going to be and that I'm happy with it. And once I know I'm happy with it, I'm going to pin down the very bottom layer, which is the candy cane. And I'm going to satin stitch all the way around this candy cane. A satin stitch is just a zigzag stitch that is very close together. Some people call it a button stitch. I've always called it a satin stitch. So it's just a zigzag stitch, and when you're working around those corners, you want to go nice and slow so it looks like a nice smooth curve. And then it creates a nice crisp line while encasing all of those raw edges. So once I get all the way around, I'm going to clip my threads and then put my gnome body on next. And I also double check it with all the other pattern pieces, make sure I'm kind of happy with it, and do another satin stitch all the way around. Next comes the feet, and I want to make sure those feet line up right with that bottom edge of the frame, and nice satin stitch all the way around. There we go. Now it's on to the beard. I'm just gonna check everything. Oh my goodness, he looks so cute. So now I'm going to pin this beard on, and we're gonna see if it's going to be a pain in the butt to actually satin stitch this beard on, or if it'll work out. So let's see. The top went on really easy, but as I started working my way down one side and across, like, it wasn't the hardest thing in the world, but I also think that it was a lot more complicated and a lot harder than will actually be shown, and it's not necessary. So I'm also going to include an easy beard, which I would highly recommend using in my pattern, just because the final look, as it's very cute, you can make it look like that with just an easy beard as well. Next, we're going to do the nose, and I want to add a little bit of puff to my nose. So I added just a little batting under there before I started to satin stitch, so it gives it a little bit of a nice bump. And then of course it's on top of the fur and everything else, so that will also help give it a nice little bump. Then we're going to move on to the hat. So I'm going to go ahead and place the hat, make sure I'm happy with it, with the hat band on top, pin it down, and satin stitch all the way around. I'm going to start with the hardest part there, going over that nose because there's a lot of fabric there, and then go all the way around. Now we have our hat band, and again, we're going to satin stitch all the way around. Now, after I finished actually putting on the hat band, I did see that I put it on a little crooked, but that's also partially what makes him a unique, fun gnome. Next, it's time to actually make this a pillow. So I'm going to take my 2 back pre-prepped pillowcases, and I'm going to pin them with edges together, with right sides together, matching up the edges. And then I'm going to sew 1/2 inch all the way around. I don't have to leave an opening or anything to put the pillow inside because the 2 center overlaps will be where you will insert your pillow. So then I'm just going to do a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. backstitching at the beginning and end, and then pulling all my pins. Now it's time to make the actual little puff ball on the top. So I'm going to start by winding some yarn around my fingers until it's nice and thick. It kind of just depends on how big of a puff ball you want to do. I wanted to do a fairly large one, so I actually wrapped quite a few times. Next, we're going to take about 6 inches worth of string, and we're going to tie around the center of our puff ball. This is going to be what's actually holding the entire thing together, so you want to give it at least 2 or 3 really good knots. Once you have those really good knots in there, we're going to flip our pillow right side out, and we're going to sew it to the top of our thing before we cut it. That way we know we are getting through that center knotted area and not just randomly through anywhere. So once we have it well sewn on there, we're going to knot it on the inside and then start chopping our loops. So I'm gonna just go ahead and keep chopping those loops and fluffing out my little puff ball. And then you can make it a little bit more even around the edges if you want. I kind of liked mine a little bit more random, but I do think he turned out really cute, and I'm really excited for my gnome to hang out on my couch for the rest of this season. And there we have it. We have our cute little gnome pillow pattern. Now I only have this as a pillowcase, so it's actually covering up one of our regular pillows we use throughout the year. So that's super handy not to have to store an entire pillow. And as you can see, my husband found the mustache quite entertaining. The one thing that I would definitely change with this pattern is I'm not sure I would go quite so intricate with the beard. That zigzagging around it was a little challenging, and I'm not sure it makes too much of a difference. So I'll make sure you guys have 2 different types of beards that you can use there. If you want this pattern, you can definitely find it down below, as well as a link to some of the other 25 days of Christmas patterns I have going. And be sure to make sure and like and subscribe to see more fun patterns like this. We'll see you in some of my other videos. Happy sewing!